Okay, so we're here to talk about the inaugural World Cup. The World Cup in 1930, hosted in Uruguay. Back in 1930, there weren't many international games, outside of the Olympic Games, of course, and the oldest rivalry in football, England versus Scotland. This tournament seemed a little bit of a novelty to many, and a lot of countries actually decided, I'm not going to take part. This tournament doesn't make sense to us. This World Cup certainly didn't have the pomp and excitement of a lot of World Cups that we enjoy today. In fact, the way to get into this World Cup was very different to today's World Cups. There was no qualification process. FIFA simply invited as many countries as possible to join the World Cup. The ones that got back to them were allowed to take part. It was a small tournament mainly dominated by those in the Americas, with a few European teams sprinkled in there. From Europe we had Belgium, France, Yugoslavia and Romania. And from North America we had Mexico and USA. Whereas from South America we had a lot more teams. We had Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, Peru and of course the hosts, Uruguay. To the eagle-eyed viewer, you'll notice that there are a lot less teams than in today's World Cup tournaments. There were only 13 teams in total. However, there were supposed to be 16 teams. Japan and Siam, now known as Thailand, were due to take part in the tournament, but at the last minute decided the tournament wasn't for them. Japan had to wait until 1998 before they eventually made their World Cup debut. Thailand, they're still waiting. One other team that was due to take part was Egypt. Egypt were the only country representing Africa in the tournament, but they had a slight hiccup getting there. As I've already said, there was no qualification process. So what held Egypt up getting to that World Cup? Well, all of the teams from Europe, they had to make a 2-week arduous boat journey down to Uruguay to make the tournament. However, Egypt, they missed the call. They missed the time they were supposed to meet the boat, and as a result, missed the entire World Cup. So the European teams that did end up making their meet time had to go all the way down to Uruguay on a 2-week arduous boat ride. It was a bit of a wing and a prayer as to what they were entering into when they got to Uruguay. There was one man on that boat, however, carrying a very, very important item. It was around 35 centimetres tall, made of solid gold, and it was, of course, the World Cup trophy. The trophy then was named the Jules Rimet Trophy, named after the FIFA president at the time, Jules Rimet. The man carrying that trophy, Jules Rimet himself. Where did he carry it? In his suitcase, amongst his pants and his socks. So, as I said, there were supposed to be 3 extra teams taking part in the tournament: Egypt, Siam and Japan. But there was one other team that nearly missed out entirely for an even more outlandish reason. The reason? Paid leave. Back then, footballers didn't earn the kind of money that footballers earn today. In fact, professional footballers back in 1930 had to supplement their football wage with a full-time job. Now, back in 1930, Romania was one of the biggest oil producers in all of Europe, and half of the team worked for the British-backed oil industry found in the Ploiești region in Romania. Workers were told, if you take the 3 months leave for this ridiculous tournament, don't expect your jobs when you return back home. However, enter King Carol II, the Playboy King of Europe, a king that had only ascended to the throne 35 days before the tournament began. The king was marred with controversies and had a very flamboyant lifestyle. However, he was also a massive football fan. The king apparently contacted the oil's management company by phone, which was no mean feat back in 1930, and said, if you don't allow these players to leave, then I'm going to shut down oil production entirely. It seems that oil states being involved in football isn't just a problem today. Suffice to say, the king got what he wanted. Thank you, King Carol II. However, it didn't just end there. You see, the king also picked the team. Coach Constantine Radulescu, he was merely there as a puppet. If they lost, it was his fault. If they won, God save the king. In the end, the team won their opening game 3-1 against Peru, which interestingly also had the first sending off in World Cup history. Peru's captain and centre midfield maestro Placido Galindo broke the leg of Adalbert Steiner of Romania. However, back then there were no red cards shown. The referee would simply ask the player, "Can you leave the field of play?" Ultimately, Romania got knocked out in the quarter-finals to the host Uruguay. I guess the company saved 1 week's paid leave. The craziness of Romania's campaign in the World Cup did not end there. On that arduous boat ride back to Europe, one player, Alfred Eisenbeißer, great name by the way, was actually taken seriously ill on the boat. When the boat stopped in Genoa, Italy, they discovered that he'd had pneumonia. He had to get off the boat and he had to go to hospital. When the rest of the team arrived back in Romania, they were greeted to a hero's welcome. However, fans quickly noticed, "Where's Eisenbeißer?" And then rumours started to circulate. The rumour was he died. This rumour, as tragic as it is, got all the way back to Eisenbeißer's family. The family obviously incredibly distraught. In his memory, they set up a funeral and they even had a wake at Eisenbeißer's mother's home. Guests arrived one by one. The mother greeted them. And then there was a knock on the door. The door was answered, and it was the one guest that nobody expected to see, Alfred Eisenbeißer himself. Of course, seeing her resurrected son seemingly sent her into a panic, and Eisenbeißer's mother fainted on sight. Who can blame her? Albert Eisenbeißer's story doesn't end there though. After this event, he ended up representing his country in ice hockey and also went on to be an Olympian in the Winter Olympics of 1936 in figure skating. So in summary, Albert Eisenbeißer represented his country at a World Cup, caught pneumonia on an arduous 2-week boat journey, died, well, everyone thought he died, attended his own funeral, was resurrected, represented his country at ice hockey, ended up going to be a Winter Olympian. I'm pretty sure Albert Eisenbeißer should have been the face of the Adidas ad campaign, "Impossible is nothing." The tournament itself was largely a success. All of the games were played in the capital city, Montevideo, Uruguay, across just 3 stadiums. The first game was France versus Mexico. France ran out winners 4-1, with Lucien Laurent scoring the first ever World Cup goal, something that would have pleased the FIFA president, Frenchman Jules Rimet. At the same time, USA were beating Belgium 3-0. Kicking off at the same time, not really as big an issue back in 1930, no TV execs to please. Argentina lit up the tournament, mainly due to their star player Guillermo Stabile, nicknamed El Fitrador. The man scored 8 goals in just 4 games, and he's also credited as the first man to score a hat-trick in a World Cup game. However, this accolade of scoring the first hat-trick in the World Cup was disputed by the Americans. American Bert Patenaude had actually scored 3 2 days previous, but FIFA incorrectly awarded one of his goals to a teammate. 76 years later, FIFA corrected that mistake and said to Bert, "Actually, you do have the first hat-trick in the World Cup." Unfortunately, Bert had passed away. Star player Stabile scored the rest of his goals by scoring 2 against Chile, 2 against the USA in the semi-final, and 1 in the final. And that final was the last time he ever played for Argentina. But his association with Argentinian football did not end there. He ended up being manager of the country and winning 6, count them, 6 Copa Americas whilst he was there. Uruguay ended up winning the tournament, much to the delight of the home fans. They beat Argentina 4-2 in the final in the newly built Estadio Centenario in front of 68,000 fans, or 93,000 fans. No one's really sure the exact number, but who's counting when you're winning, right? Interestingly, the 4th goal for Uruguay was scored by Hector Castro, a man who only had 1 arm. He lost a limb in a childhood accident, but was still able to have a professional football career. This World Cup also set a record in the final that is still to be beaten to this day. Uruguay's head coach, Alberto Supisi, is still the youngest man to ever manage his country to a World Cup win, at just 31 years old. And there's even more to tell. The final itself between Uruguay and Argentina were two of the fiercest rivals in all of football. So much so that the Belgian referee, John Langenus, insisted, "I'm only refereeing this game if there's a getaway boat for me straight after the game." Both countries hated each other so much they couldn't even agree as to what football they used. So the compromise was, we'll use Argentina's ball in the first half and we'll use Uruguay's ball in the second half. Interestingly, Argentina were 2-1 up at half-time. Due to the win, there were huge celebrations in all of Uruguay. It was actually considered a national holiday due to the win. Players that were involved were given homes and they were given land as a thank you from the nation. Despite the small nature of the tournament to the outside world, the sheer magnitude of the achievement was not lost on the Uruguayans. They were in fact the first country to be crowned World Cup champions. Overall, the tournament was seen as a massive success and a precursor to one of the biggest sporting festivals celebrated every 4 years. This World Cup did lay the groundwork for future World Cups, but it wasn't without its dramas, just like a lot of the tournaments. However, it does seem like this tournament had a lot of interesting oddities that have been lost in time. Next time, I shall be discussing the 1934 World Cup held in Mussolini's Italy.